And now time to say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, welcome back. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for being here. I have to say, one of the things that is nice about Twitter, and there are not many things that are nice about it, was the kind of setting to music of your meandering through, because it did look like a sort of a very casual walk through Oxford being followed by this crowd.
Well, I have to walk casually at my age. I mean, I can, when cowardice gets a grip, I can go quite fast, but that's my sort of normal pace.
Yes, well, you did explain that you have been in some rather dangerous situations, to wit, I think Lithuania was one, and East Germany was another. Tell us about those.
Well, always either lying on the ground or running away. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these war junkie people. Absolutely not a chance of that. No, I was in Lithuania in January 1991, an event almost nobody remembers because it coincided with a major offensive in the First Gulf War.
Yeah.
But the Lithuanians were trying to get their independence, and the Soviet Union at that time was trying to stop them, and they got quite violent.
Yeah.
And one particular night they attacked the television station. And I remember quite well lying on the ground, actually face upwards in the dirty snow, saying to the Lithuanians around me, look, the best thing to do under these circumstances is to lie down. They said, we're not lying down. We've been lying down for 60 years.
Yeah.
We're not doing it anymore.
Well, this is it.
It was quite frightening. And in East Berlin, there was some demonstration on the Schönhauser Allee before the fall of the wall, and the People's Police got out all their riot gear and started charging. I thought, well, these are people I don't want to meet.
Right.
So I was amazed at how fast I could go.
Absolutely, and this is the thing. I mean, I spent a little bit of time in Bosnia in the mid-90s, where proper civil wars are going on, and we have a tendency here to slightly overstate things. And when people talk about, we are being threatened by this violent mob, and we are having our freedoms taken away, until you've been to those places where that does actually happen, and the requirements and the results of it are so deadly, I think we probably get a little bit carried away.
Well, I think sometimes people say, well, what on earth, what business have you got telling us your opinions? Why should anybody care about your opinions more than about anybody else's? And one of the reasons for that is that I've been out. Yes. I've been abroad. I've been into the sort of circumstances we've described, and therefore, however stupid and dismal I may be, I have picked up a certain amount of noise which most people don't have, and it's quite useful to me.
It is. But still, let's look at what actually did happen, because you were quite rightly going about your business as a citizen of this nation, but also as a journalist. You went to observe day 3 or whatever it was of the Cecil Rhodes demonstration. And I read with some interest yesterday that they're now thinking of replacing Cecil Rhodes' statue with a statue of a black student who went to Oxford on a Cecil Rhodes scholarship in 1907. It seems to me that we've reached kind of Alice in Wonderland status here.
Well, it's complicated. I mean, I'm not going to stand bail for Cecil Rhodes, who had a lot of things wrong with him, though many of the things that are said about him are also probably exaggerated too. It's not. For me, I think it's an ugly statue on an ugly building of a complicated man who was a mixture of good and bad, the good mainly being the philanthropy he did later. But I don't want to get involved in that. I think I pretty much knew by the time I went on that demonstration that the college was likely to back down, because that's the way the establishment is at the moment. If they're threatened, they back down. It's the bizarre, almost revolutionary situation in which we are. Yes, in which
but your presence,
conservative, just goes.
But your presence at that demo was what caused the fuss, right?
Well, that's one way of putting it. I'd been present at the demonstration for some time. I'd followed them up from the High Street round into St Aldate Street and then along a bit for about, I suppose, half a mile. And I'd been chatting to some of the demonstrators, in most cases in a perfectly friendly fashion. But I think they got bored because the route of the march was too long. Right. And one of them, a guy I'd never seen before, quite older than most of them, very gaunt character, spotted me and started glaring at me, and then he started up this chant. And because we were going around corners at the time, and because the person filming me, who I don't think was a friend of mine, was filming me as walking backwards, filming me from the front, it looks much more as if they're coming up behind me than what was actually happening, which was that I was walking on the pavement and they were walking on the road. And it is, how shall I put it, it's a novel experience having people chanting your name in a hostile way quite close to you.
Yeah. It must be, because it must be quite unsettling. I mean, you look, as I said, very, very insouciant as you were walking, and I thought,
nice you say so.
well,
yeah.
I thought rather stylish actually. But I mean, the funny thing is it must. Although you say you felt more threatened by a group of hamsters, you might.
Hamsters could be terrible.
I'm sure. Yeah, a gerbil on your finger if it bites you. Terrible.
Yeah, goodness. Savaged by a guinea pig is bad too.
Yes, but I mean, it must have been unsettling at least.
Well, look, I have other experiences that people don't have. I used to go on demonstrations myself when left-wing ideas were actually a good deal less popular than they are now, and when we hadn't won. And we were a lot rowdier. And one of the things I took up station, a place where I got interrogated by one of the marchers, was very close to Rhodes' house in Oxford, I thought, which is towards the end of the route of the march. I thought maybe some of them would make a break for it. And I have to say, in my day of demonstrating, that would almost certainly have happened. People would have, but I have a strong suspicion a lot of the marchers didn't even know that Rhodes' House, which is the headquarters of the Rhodes Scholarship, was even called Rhodes' House or was there. I didn't know they were, because they know so little about it. But these marchers were actually much more passive and flaccid than we ever were.
Yeah.
In my left-wing marching days, I got a quite considerable melee in Grosvenor Square in March 1968, for instance. They were, at one stage, I actually noticed them going up to the police and saying, could the police help them deal with a drunk who was following them around?
Yeah.
Which is,
well, it's sort of middle class. It's very middle class. This revolution.
It is middle class, but it's not just that. It's the establishment on parade. It's a sort of religious procession rather than a protest.
Yes.
And what these things do is they provide the pretext for the left-wing people in places like Oriel College to say, well, look, there's a big protest about this. We want to bring it to an end. Let's make concessions. Same with anybody in Bristol who. In official circles, who might have wanted the Colston statue to come down, they might also have been quite glad to have the pretext of a mob pulling it down and say, well, it's obviously got to go now.
Yes.
What these things do, what these demonstrations do, is they affirm in the establishment the general move to the left, whereas when we were doing it, we were trying to get people to become left-wing when they weren't, and that's a wholly different thing.
And you were genuinely...
One of the reasons I wasn't bothered is because I know what demonstrators are like, and that kind of demonstration doesn't frighten me.
No, sure. But I guess the next question then is, when does it end? Because I've asked this to people. In fact, I had somebody on a couple of weeks ago from Black Lives Matter, and I said, when do your marches end? What is your aim? And when do you realise that you've reached your aim? And basically he said, well, we'll never reach our aim. We'll continue with this for the rest of time. But I don't agree with that, because I think the middle-class people who were following you around in Oxford have a limited attention span as a result of their upbringing, and they probably will get bored with it, either by the time the summer ends because the weather won't be very nice, or just because they've got something better to do.
Well, my theory is different from yours. I think that the government that we have now has pretty much done to itself what John Major did over the exchange rate mechanism in 1992.
Yeah.
But people don't realize it yet because the economic consequences have yet to kick in. When they do kick in, and when an awful lot of people have lost their jobs, and when life has become a great deal harder for pretty much all of us, then the revenge will come. And this will actually rather illogically probably sweep into power a new Labour government, headed by Keir Starmer, who's...
God help us.
Well, you may say that, and let us hope that he will, but I think it's very likely, especially, as I say, once a lot of people lose their jobs and associate it with a government which has not distinguished itself. I think you'll agree.
Well, I do agree at this moment in time. I absolutely do agree with you. I still maintain that
Keir Starmer I have no time for him, but he's managed to distance himself from that.
No, I think that's true, but I think it's a sort of a con trick that he's playing on everybody, which was partially exposed last Wednesday in Prime Minister's Questions when he was unable to say what he thought about schools. And I can only assume that he can't say what he thinks because he's going to upset somebody. And he seems to worry about that an awful lot. But I was talking to John Rentoul earlier this morning, Peter, and I'd be interested in what you have to say about this. He said, we were talking about the whole U-turn business with free school meals and all of that, and he said, but it was the right thing to do. And I worry that that is now the phrase which we are being governed by. It's the right thing to do. And of course, for one person, the right thing to do is very different from what other people may think.
Well, it's true. But what you know when you start, that there are some things against which you cannot argue. And this is what was happening in the late years, again, of John Major, which a lot of this reminds me of, only with knobs on. And Blair himself was an obvious, well, how shall I put it, obviously not very impressive. There was one occasion when he was approached by reporters to give a comment about a transport strike. And he was so unable to answer the question. He was so afraid of either offending the unions or offending the public that he turned around and ran away. And Keir Starmer was in the same position over the schools when Prime Minister's questions, but it had no effect. Everybody was so sick of the major government that it didn't matter. Blair could do practically anything. He even got away with the Formula One thing in his first months in government. He could do practically anything and nobody would mind. The problem is that the Starmer government, when it comes into office, which I think it will be as free as the air to do what it likes. And a lot of the things that it will do will be to take this country much, much further to the left than it's ever been before. And all the old forces of conservatism that Blair was afraid of, probably wrongly because they were crumbling and feeble at the time he came in, they won't be able to stop it. This will be New Labour on speed.
Well, the thing that I would say...
That's what I'm really afraid of. The political correctness, the wokeness of government will be hugely magnified.
No, it will, no question. But I think one of the reasons why Tony Blair succeeded in the election and got such a landslide was because not only were people fed up with John Major, they were fed up with what was being described really as old-fashioned politics. And when Tony Blair came in, it did seem like a breath of fresh air. It did seem like a new beginning. It almost, until we found out that all those people lining the streets were actually paid to be there, we actually believed it at the time that, here's a young guy with young children in Downing Street, and it was a kind of a Kennedy-esque renaissance, wasn't it?
No, you speak for yourself in that.
I'm talking about the mood of the nation, Peter.
I knew that demonstration was phony as soon as I saw it.
Right.
I knew you couldn't get into Downing Street without official permission. And I knew all those people waving Union Jacks would much rather be waving red flags anyway. They'd obviously been told what to do.
Right.
And I'd known Blair since before he was famous. And I knew what manner of person he was. So, but it was useless. My usual Cassandra role of saying to people, no, honestly, please, it's all the time.
Do you get tired of this?
Don't do it. I do get tired of it because if only anybody had paid attention to me, we would actually now be a lot better off.
Yes. Well, Nick Timothy's actually written this thing piece.
In the end, I used to make myself unhappy by thinking, well, if only I could have some impact. And people always accuse me of standing on the sidelines, whatever they are. But I really, really tried to have a political impact. And I found out that most people actually aren't interested. And I now just enjoy myself taking the mickey out of it all.
Yes, I think that's by far and away a more sensible attitude to have. But
it's a terrible shame. I wish I could insert myself in some way into mainstream politics and have some impact. But I've tried, and I know it's not possible. So all I can do is stand by and laugh at it and hope that I will die before they come and throw me into prison.
Yes, well, or before they stop you from actually writing what you want to write.
It's not. I don't rule that out. I think those days may be coming, and this is the problem. They're not. My indictments have already been drawn up. I've seen them at various student occasions. The distorted and selective quotations from my writings going back for 20 years.
Right.
I know what form my show trial will take if it ever comes.
Yes. Now, I'm no fan of Nick Timothy, but he's written a piece in the Telegraph today saying the Conservatives can never win the culture wars while Blair and Brown's legacy remains intact. Do you think that the Blair-Brown years have kind of planted these sleepers in the culture of this country, which are never going to move?
I think it was a huge revolution, and people expect revolution still. They expect barricades in the streets and broken bodies lying like broken dolls in the street corner and pools of smoke hanging over the city. Revolutions are not conducted like that anymore, and I think they conducted a very smooth, hugely effective revolution in the culture, in the establishment, in the legal system, in everything, and they changed the country in ways which it would probably take centuries to reverse. And I think we've been through that now, and now comes the next stage.
Yes,
and oddly enough, the thing that triggered it was the Johnson government's crazy decision. A beautiful, wonderfully, brilliantly written and savage article in the Mail on Sunday by Jonathan Sumption yesterday, sums this up beautifully, was the wholly mistaken panic decision by the Johnson government to close the country down, which opened the way for this. It's almost like the decision that the Tsar of all the Russias made to mobilize his army in 1914. That was the end. It was an irreversible decision which destroyed him. And the one thing which Johnson did, which has brought to an end any last trace of conservatism in this country, was that.
So are we now destined to have a sort of rudderless government for the next 4 years? Because it appears a bit rudderless. I don't think it'll last that long. I think again, you mustn't underestimate the scale of the economic
problems which we've imposed on ourselves. I don't think this government can last that long with once the unemployment and all the other things, the raids on savings and the increases in taxation, the falls in standard of living, and the sheer misery of trying to live endlessly with these stupid rules. Once all that kicks in, I don't think this government can survive.
But you see, the rules are now being the rules are now being almost universally ignored, aren't they?
Well, not you can't if you're in the hospitality industry, or if you're in a shop, or if you're a hairdresser, because you're open not just to prosecution but to lawsuits, and this is the big problem. My offices can't easily reopen.
Well, I take the view now that since you can now march, despite the fact that a new law was made last week which prohibited such activity of more than 6 people, when the police start to say things like, please stay at home, but if you feel compelled to march, then please try and stay safe. I mean, it's anarchy to me, isn't it?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But I wonder how in practice it will work. As I say, the danger comes mainly from the lawsuit culture and the unwillingness of insurers to insure people to do things which were previously normal. Insurance is a huge problem now, thanks to Mrs. Thatcher's legalization of ambulance chasing lawyers. But the other thing I have to mention is what is going to happen when this country actually leaves the European Union. It's a hugely neglected subject now. But I don't think any serious practical preparations are being made for what is almost certainly going to be a pretty rocky exit at the end of the year. And if it goes wrong, and if the predictions of my old friend Crystal Booker, who now, alas, is not here to talk about it anymore, of the dangers of suddenly becoming a third country become true, then add to that the mess we're already in. And I just see crisis.
Yeah, well, you may well turn out to be correct, but I mean, more and more people.
I hope not.
No, more and more people are certainly coming around to your way of thinking that, and you hear it now more and more in the sort of mainstream conversations, politically speaking, about the lockdown being too severe. But let me ask you one question. I don't know whether you've got an iPhone or an Android phone, but have you checked to see whether you have had installed on your phone a COVID-19 exposure logging app? Because I have, and it's on my phone, and I didn't ask for it to be put there.
Really, good heavens, no, I haven't checked.
Have you got an iPhone?
I think it's an iPhone. I pay so little attention to it, I don't really know what it is.
All right. Well, if you go into the settings, and you go into the privacy settings, and you go into the health settings after that, if it's there, you will see it.
Settings, privacy, health. Well, I'll look.
Yeah.
You don't want me to do it now on air, do you?
Well, you can if you want, but I mean,
knowing my phone confidence, we probably just hear me going.
No, but I mean, it's quite. I mean, even
splatter of the thing falling to the ground. Let's do it later.
But it's a very worrying, and I've got lots of people.
Settings, privacy, health.
Yes.
That order.
Yeah, if it's an iPhone. I'm not sure if it's an Android. I'm not sure what you do. But, I mean, that to me...
My phone has been in North Korea. It's got all kinds of funny things.
Okay. Well, I mean, that to me is something that would happen to you in North Korea. You'd suddenly walk around and go, oh, look, the government's tracking me. Now, as you and I have said before, I've been tracked, I'm sure, by Facebook and Google and all sorts of other people. So I'm not that bothered about it, but I'm slightly more concerned when the government's doing it.
Yeah, but again, it's another thing about living in Moscow. You got so used to it.
Yeah.
They put microphones everywhere that it became either you went mad or you started laughing at it. and I can't. I can only laugh. And given the general incompetence of almost all government IT projects, I still think the danger from Google and Facebook is probably bigger.
Now, if you think that this is all going to come crashing down around Boris Johnson's ears, are you telling me that you think there will have to be an election before the term of government is up then?
I think it's highly possible, but one can't predict the nature of the crisis.
I mean, he would have to lose a massive amount of support in his own party, wouldn't he, for that to happen?
Yes, he would. That's what happens, though, isn't it? I mean, again, one recalls the crises of John Major, who effectively handed over the government, as far as I could ever see, to Michael Heseltine at one point, simply to stay in office, but whose final years in office after the ERM were as a ghost.
Yeah.
Not really, and fundamentally keeping Downing Street warm for Blair. But on this occasion, I think that it's going to be bad. I mean, it's 1931 we're talking about in terms of the economic shock, which is coming. And remember what that did for Ramsay MacDonald.
Yes, but there again, as I've said before,
for the Labour Party, and because they had the great misfortune to be in power when it happened, and it took them a very long time to recover.
But I think the other thing which I will still cling on to until such time as it's ripped from my grip is the fact that they can't allow the economy to collapse completely. The rest of the world is in the same boat, more or less, and it may well be that some will not be as badly affected as our economy, but most of them are. Most people who rely on tourism have got absolutely no tourism going on at all, and the government and the world's economy cannot afford to be allowed to collapse, I don't think. So that's kind of what I'm hoping will end up as the case.
Well, I hope you're right, but here's the problem. I mean, our economy is, in many important ways, worse than those of many other advanced economies. We go on about it being the sixth or seventh largest in the world, but in fact, judged by gross domestic product per head, it's much further down. It's more like 26th from memory. And then we have very heavy levels, both of personal debt and public debt. We don't make very much, which is very important if you need to recover from a crisis. The manufacturing is usually the way by which this is done. We rely terribly heavily on the very service industries which we have closed down. And I think if you were sort of looking at a league table of the vulnerable economies of Europe, ours would be we don't even have, well, even the Russians have, which is a very big oil and gas reserve to fall back on. All that's dying out now. We used to have that huge advantage, and it's gone. And I think that we could do worse than an awful lot of countries in this time that is coming because of those weaknesses and because of our very, very long years of very bad export performance as well, so that our current account deficit is shockingly bad. I'm not sure about that. And the thing is that you can be rescued, but you can be rescued to a point which most of us would still pretty much think of as far, far worse than the way we live now.
Well, we shall see. Unfortunately, we're out of time again, Peter, but delightful to talk to you once more. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We'll talk to you next Monday. We'll see where we are then. We could well be very close to having a pint together. You never know. Somewhere near Kensington or not a million miles from there.